Start now.
A very pleasant morning to everyone present on this
Start
online
कीजिए ना.
platform. आवाज नहीं आ रही मेरी? आवाज आ रही? Am I audible?
Yes.
आ रही? Okay.
Sir, please mute yourself for some time.
A very pleasant morning.
DP, please start.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Ari.
Okay. A very pleasant morning to everyone
Yes,
present
you are.
on this online platform. I, Dr. Deepti Jain Thakre, welcome you all on the third day of the National Online 8-Day Certificate course in Shakespeare Studies organized under the aegis of Shakespeare Society of Central India in collaboration with Department of English of HISLOP College, Nagpur, SANTAJI Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, RAJKUMAR KEWALRAMANI Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, and J.M. Patel Arts, Commerce and Science College, Bhandara. After the two scholarly doses by Dr. Subir Dhar and Dr. Supanta Bhattacharya on the play Macbeth, today we will deal with yet another interesting aspect of Shakespearean studies, that is, trends in Shakespearean criticism. For that, we have with us a renowned personality, Dr. K. Shripad Bhatt. Before I invite Dr. Bhatt for his discourse, I'll introduce you to Dr. Shripad Bhatt. Dr. Bhatt is Dean, Faculty of Languages and Literature, and Professor, and Head, Department of English, Goa University. He has a teaching experience of 35 years. He has recently completed a research project entitled Cultural Studies, Theory and Methodology. This multilingual personality has to his credit several research articles published in national and international journals in English, Kannada, and Hindi. He has also published books entitled Monk Without Monastery and Murray as a Literary Critic. He is also a PhD guide who has helped many candidates complete their PhD under his able supervision. He possesses membership of Advisory Board of Society for Phenomenology and is life member of Forum on Contemporary Theory. He is also a visiting faculty, New York University, New York, and Memorial University, Canada. He has delivered more than 25 keynote speeches in various national seminars. Not only this, in 2010 and 2011, he has worked as a jury for books translated into Kannada under Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati Pradhikara, Department of Kannada and Culture, Government of Karnataka. He initiated into Yakshagna, a well-known folk theatrical form of coastal Karnataka at the age of 3. Being an amateur artist, he has enacted in more than 300 stage productions of Yakshagana. We are indeed privileged to have this multi-talented personality amongst us today. I invite Dr. Shripad Bhatt for his scholarly discourse on trends in Shakespearean criticism. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dipti. It was nice of you. Thank you again. So now let's get into the business end of today's presentation. The topic of my presentation today is trends in Shakespeare criticism. I would like to grapple with the changing dynamics of Shakespeare criticism. It hasn't remained the same, and it is still on.
Sir, आवाज नहीं आ रही आपकी.
You can't hear me?
Not clear. Your voice is not clear.
Now, is it clear?
Yeah, now it's clear.
Now it's coming. Yeah, now it's okay.
I will just hold it close to my mouth. And I think I will...
Sir, still it's gone.
It's gone. Not here. Not clear.
Sir, there is some noisy voice.
Okay, I will put off the fan. 2 minutes. Okay? 2 minutes.
There's a bugging sound, sir. There's a bugging sound. Like it's not clear.
Now, is it clear?
That
Yeah,
sound is
still
still
is
there.
there.
Yeah,
The
that
sound is there, sir. Because of the sound, we are unable to hear clearly.
right.
Okay, I don't know. There is no sound here. I will change the yes. Okay.
So try speaking without the earphone.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
It's better
yes,
now.
now it's fine,
Clearly
sir. Now it's
audible.
fine.
Right, sir.
Okay, I will not use the earphone. Okay, I will straight away speak here.
Yeah.
Uh,
now it's
whenever I'm not audible, please caution me. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Now I will present my PPT before you. I'm sharing it with you. Please let me know whether you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Trends in Shakespeare Criticism. That is the title of my presentation today. All right, let me go into the text of my presentation. It's my belief that every age or every culture creates its own Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is a kind of mirror, and everybody, every culture, every nation would like to see its own reflection on a mirror called Shakespeare. His plays and characters are like a portrait whose eyes seem to follow you around the room. You know, you might have seen some beautiful paintings, particularly one in Mysore. When you enter the room, you feel that the eyes of the portrait are following you, and that is Shakespeare for you. So, for any literary critical venture, as and when a new critical theory appears on the scene, appears on the horizon, Shakespeare becomes the ultimate yardstick. He is the ultimate yardstick for any school of criticism to signal its arrival and test its own theoretical and methodological tools. So that way, Shakespeare becomes an ultimate challenge, an ultimate test for any school of criticism. And that is the beauty of Shakespeare. Now let us begin from the beginning itself. How Shakespeare was received by his contemporaries. We are told that Shakespeare is a child of the Elizabethan age. So how was he perceived by his own people, common people? He was perceived as a great entertainer, and Shakespeare, the great entertainer, delivered several blockbusters like Romeo and Juliet, like Macbeth, like King Lear. These were all the blockbusters of the Elizabethan age. So that way, he is comparable to some of our famous contemporary directors like Rajamouli, who is a director of Bahubali, and many others. So that way, he was very popular. He was a legend during his own time. And Shakespeare had the ability to reach both the elites and the masses with remarkable felicity. That is, that is a USP of Shakespeare. So the people, they were called the groundlings, who would occupy the front benches. Okay, they would whistle when a beautiful dialogue is uttered. And similarly, somebody, it could be the prince or it could be the queen, she would nod her head with appreciation and approval. So he had that ability, and he was also indispensable component of popular culture and imagination of the Elizabethan times. See, this is something which we never speak about. How he could connect himself with the common people, how he became the part of Elizabethan popular culture. So this is something which we miss often, but this is very important. So he was that way. He was a legend for his contemporaries. Now, how was he reviewed? How was he received or accepted by his peer group. He had many peers. Ben Jonson was one among them. One contemporary writer, his name was Francis Meres. In 1598, he declared Shakespeare to be England's greatest writer in comedy and tragedy. So this is a review of Shakespeare in 1598. And another poet and writer, his name was John Weaver. He lauded honey-tongued Shakespeare. So this was the greatest compliment given by John Weaver to his contemporary writer who goes by the name of Shakespeare. And with the writings of Ben Jonson on Shakespeare, we will see the beginnings of Shakespeare criticism. So you have all heard of the famous utterance of Ben Jonson about Shakespeare. Quote, he was not of an age, but for all time. Shakespeare is timeless. So it was Ben Jonson, the contemporary of Shakespeare, who drove home the timelessness of Shakespeare's plays. And he described his plays as a monument without a tomb. What a beautiful expression. This was the way Ben Jonson described the plays of Shakespeare. And of course, as I said now, he foregrounds the timelessness of Shakespeare. Shakespeare belongs to all times. Shakespeare, his plays, they crystallize the universal human experience, whether it is Othello or Macbeth or Juliet. In a way, they're all symbols, universal symbols. But at the same time, Ben Jonson was critical of Shakespeare for lacking refinement and also for flouting classical rules. You know, Shakespeare was that way. He never bothered about Aristotelian rules. In fact, he enjoyed flouting the classical or neoclassical rules. And therefore, Ben Jonson, mildly takes Shakespeare to task for flouting classical rules. So this is the story. This is a narrative of the 16th century. What happens in the 17th century? Shakespeare is hailed as English Homer. And there is a definite pattern. There is a kind of appreciation followed by criticism, culminating in a burst of applause. So they are all praised for Shakespeare. They treat him a genius par excellence, and at the same time, they are a bit uneasy about certain issues, like, as I said before, flouting the classical norms set by none other than the master himself, Aristotle. John Dryden, he treats Shakespeare. He calls Shakespeare a native genius, gifted with imagination, but he says Shakespeare lacked decorum and judgment. John Dryden, okay, he's the voice of the 17th century, an elite. So it's an elite's way of looking at a common playwright, or a playwright who came from non-elite background. So grudgingly, he considers Shakespeare as a native genius, but at the same time, he believes that his genius is flawed due to his lack of decorum and judgment. So what I'm trying to say is this. Here in the 17th century, Shakespeare is seen through the prism of neoclassicism. What about 18th century? When it comes to 18th century, I have given an epithet here, a title here, majestic Gothic ruins. Again, they are all overwhelmed by the genius of Shakespeare. So in a way, there is a kind of continuation of the neoclassical trajectory when it comes to the 18th century. And Alexander Pope, the younger contemporary of Dryden, he says that Shakespeare's plays deserve greater reverence, but some segments seem childish, ill-placed, and unequal to its grandeur. I repeat, according to him, Shakespeare's plays deserve greater reverence because, It's a product of a genius, no doubt about it. But at the same time, some segments within Shakespeare seem childish, ill-placed, and unequal to its grandeur. So it's a kind of, he considers Shakespeare as a kind of a flawed diamond. Diamond, no doubt about it, but at the same time, there are some tiny flaws built into this glittering diamond. So that is how Alexander Pope looks at Shakespeare. Samuel Johnson, or he is known as Dr. Johnson, offers a more nuanced and balanced view of Shakespeare. So in a way, I would rather say Johnson's work on Shakespeare is the first serious attempt to come to grips with the works of Shakespeare. Now let's move on to the 19th century. Here, Shakespeare becomes the icon of British national culture. So until then, Shakespeare was a great playwright, but in the 19th century, Shakespeare becomes a brand. Now, why does it happen? Make no mistake, during the late 18th century or early part of the 19th century, English literature appears on the scene. I'm not saying that there were no writings before the 19th century. No, I'm speaking about the arrival of the institution of English literature that happened towards the end of the 18th century or the beginning of the 20th century, beginning of the 19th century. So that period from 1780 to 1920, that is the time, 1780 to 1820. So that is the time English literature as an institution appears on the scene. And they required somebody who was at the center, who was the centerpiece of this great institution called literature. Who else other than Shakespeare? So make no mistake, this period also, it coincides with the emergence of England as a supreme imperial power. So that happens at the beginning of the 19th century. And they wanted an icon. They wanted a brand. So Shakespeare becomes the brand, the ready-made icon. So Shakespeare is integrated as a supreme canon of English literature. So the same Shakespeare is packaged and sealed and is sent to the colonies as part of a civilizing mission. Remember, English literature was taught first in the colonies, not in England. That happened 50 years later. So Shakespeare was part of this civilizing mission to civilize the browns of Asia and the blacks of Africa. Well, so during this period, you will see Shakespeare being romanced by practically all the critics. And Coleridge, the greatest critic of the 19th century, England, he believes that Shakespeare is an organic genius gifted with spontaneity. As I told you, every school of criticism tries to test its methodological tools. And Coleridge, as all of you know, is a founder of a new kind of criticism, which was later known as Romantic criticism. So, he foregrounds romantic perspective while coming to grips with the works of Shakespeare. And you have heard of the famous and oft-quoted expression of Wordsworth, particularly about the sonnets of Shakespeare. And according to Wordsworth, in these sonnets, Shakespeare unlocked his heart. What a beautiful metaphor. So, according to him, through his sonnets, Shakespeare revealed himself. He expressed his emotions through his sonnets. So he unlocked his heart. Remember, this expression comes very closer to Wordsworth's definition of poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. When you unlock your heart, your emotions start tumbling out. And that is how he looks at the sonnets of Shakespeare. And Charles Lamb and Thomas De Quincey, who came a bit later, created the larger-than-life image of Shakespeare. So by the end of the 19th century, Shakespeare had already begun his journey as the brand ambassador of English literature. So he was being packaged and exported everywhere, particularly to the colonies, or particularly to all the parts of English-speaking world. And that way, let's be very clear, Shakespeare in India is part of this colonial baggage. I will return to this point a while later. Early 20th century, here you will come across a larger-than-life kind of critic. His name is A.C. Bradley. He came out with his monumental work titled Shakespearean Tragedy, published more than 100 years ago in 1904. So here he radically altered the narrative of Shakespeare criticism by foregrounding character analysis, which was not done by any of his predecessors among English critics. And Bradley, he presents before us a kind of Shakespeare who is a master. And his works, particularly tragedies, they make a grand unfolding of the conflict between the hero and his universe. So a relentless conflict is going on between the protagonist, the tragic hero specifically, and his universe. And this man, whether it is Macbeth or Othello or King Lear, he's not an ordinary man. He's a very, he's a glory of man, but he's consumed by tragic flaw. So at the end of the day, his own tragic flaw is, it becomes his undoing, resulting in his tragic end. This is the kind of interpretation A.C. Bradley, offers in this famous book titled Shakespearean Tragedy. And all of us, even today, even 100 years later, are following the same narrative set by A.C. Bradley, particularly when we analyze his tragedies. So here you will see the kind of exposition of essential humanism and individualism on an epic scale, and that is the achievement of A.C. Bradley. Well, later, in 1920s and 30s and 40s, you will see the arrival of formalist criticism led by F.R. Lewis. So F.R. Lewis was the editor of Scrutiny, and he had many followers like L.C. Knights, and on the other end you had G. Wilson Knight. So it was a very fecund period, in terms of Shakespeare criticism. So all these people, whether it was Lewis or L.C. Knights or G. Wilson Knight and other new critics, offered a close reading of Shakespeare's text. So for the first time, you will see, a critic making a close reading of the text, focusing on the dramatic text and coming out with a nuanced meaning, a nuanced reading of Shakespeare. But at the same time, we should acknowledge the fact that formalists glossed over the historical background by focusing only on language, tone, imagery, rhythm, etc. Nevertheless, they enriched our understanding of Shakespeare in a phenomenal manner. And during this period, we come across an interesting book, by one Polish gentleman. His name is Jan Kot. He came out with a beautiful text, Shakespeare, Our Contemporary. I request all of you here who are present on this virtual platform to read this book. You don't have to buy it, just Google it, you get a text, a beautiful text. And I still remember, my own teachers, including Professor U.R. Ananthamurthy, exhorting us to read this book. Have you read Shakespeare or Contemporary? It was a rage, during my student days, even though it was published much earlier in 1960s. So why this book is very important? Because here Shakespeare is analyzed from the perspective of a Polish playwright, a Polish director. Jan Kott was the director of plays, and he was also a playwright, and he went through hell during the Second World War. So based on his experience, all of you know, Poland was invaded by Germany during the Second World War. So he foregrounds his own harrowing experience while reading Shakespeare, and the result is Shakespeare, our contemporary. Shakespeare doesn't belong to the 16th century. He is relevant even today. Well, now the whole narrative changes, particularly after 70s and 80s. And during this period, you will see the arrival of post-structuralist theories. And here, with the arrival of post-structuralist theories, you would see veneration or uncritical admiration being replaced by critical scrutiny. So for the first time, Shakespeare is under the scanner, so to speak. All the while, the narrative was simple. Shakespeare is great. However, there are certain issues. Nevertheless, he is a great writer. But that narrative is changed by post-structuralist criticism, and it is actually replaced by a kind of close critical scrutiny. So here, in many post-structuralist theories, you would find them foregrounding historical, linguistic, and psychoanalytical perspectives. And at the same time, they reject the Bradleyan, essentialist, humanist, and idealistic interpretation of Shakespeare. So A.C. Bradley is critiqued by all these post-structuralist theories, and they come out with their own interpretation of Shakespeare. So what is visible here, in this entire spectrum of post-structuralist theories is a kind of constant shifting of boundaries. It's not fixed. These boundaries keep on shifting. I will explain it a while later. Now, how do Marxist critics specifically come to grips with Shakespeare? Well, what do? They focus on the Elizabethan age. They look at Shakespeare as the product of Elizabethan age. Well, that goes well with their belief that every individual is a product of his or her own age. And at the same time, they also historicize the reader. So it's not only Shakespeare who is treated as the product of his own age, but also the reader, because they also want to look at how Shakespeare is read by different cultures, by people belonging to different cultural locations and historical locations. And the offshoot of Marxist theory is cultural materialism, which was developed by Dollimore and Sinfield. And they have made a very significant contribution to Shakespeare criticism. And what do? They focus on certain things which are not there, or which are left unsaid. In other words, they read against the grain while dealing with the works of Shakespeare. Let me give you one example. This essay you will find in Political Shakespeare by Dollimore and Sinfield. I'm telling you right now about an essay on Macbeth, the tragedy, written by Ellen Sinfield. So what is he saying? The play opens with a murder of a king, a legitimate king, Duncan, by a usurper, a powerful chieftain. His name is Macbeth, and that is treated as a sin, because you shall not destabilize monarchy. You have no right to be the successor to the king Duncan. Then who can be the legitimate successor to the king Duncan? Only his son Malcolm. So the play begins with a murder, and that is treated as a horrifying kind of assassination. At the same time, the play comes to an end with the murder of a king. By then, Macbeth is a king, and that murder is considered to be legitimate. That is considered to be a kind of retribution, and it is done by whom? By none other than the rightful claimant to the throne, Malcolm, the prince. Now, according to Sinfield, this particular play of Shakespeare, in a way, legitimizes the monarchic ideology. And remember, prior to the Elizabethan age, there was a lot of political turbulence in England. And only during the time of Queen Elizabeth, things started settling down. And in a way, this particular play, Macbeth, in a way, it tries to legitimize monarchic ideology, which is very simple. Only a prince or a princess can inherit the throne, and no outsider has any right to this throne. So this ideology, according to Sinfield, is very brilliantly, but at the same time, in a way, in a very subtle way, mediated through the play Macbeth. And you have another interesting book by John Drakaki, Alternative Shakespeares. And at the same time, Terry Eagleton also comes out with his famous book on William Shakespeare. So he examines Shakespeare in his own way, in his own characteristic way. So these are all the beautiful examples of Marxist approach to Shakespeare. Then you have a subtext to this entire Marxist narrative. A new kind of critical school is developed by Stephen Greenblatt, and that is called New Historicism, because New Historicism is also anchored in Foucault's theory. And here, Shakespeare again is looked at with a different kind of angle. So in the whole process, I believe Marxists have, really enriched our understanding of Shakespeare to a considerable degree. Well, there is a shift there is a twist in the tale. Simultaneously, feminists also enter the scene, and they consider Shakespeare as a patriarchal bard. So, what do feminist critics do? Feminist criticism illuminates the extent to which Shakespeare inhabited the patriarchal world dominated by men and fathers, in which women were essentially the means of exchange in power relationships, whether it is Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, whether it is Miranda in The Tempest. In one way or the other, you can see in Shakespeare's plays the domineering role of a father, particularly in The Tempest. Prospero, he's a typical and quintessential father. And they also speak about Romeo's macho male loyalties. They juxtapose Romeo's macho male loyalties with the gentle and forgiving model of Juliet. So there also, they try to draw a distinction between the masculine characters in Shakespeare and also the feminine characters. And Juliet Dusimbo, she has written way back in 1975 a beautiful book titled Shakespeare and the Nature of Women. And Lisa Jardine, in 1983, she has come out with another book titled Still Harping on Daughters. So I request all of you to go through these books and you will come across these perspectives. Okay, how Shakespeare in a way reinforces patriarchal issues, particularly related to marriage, gender relations, and power. And they try to then you have a deconstructionist approach to Shakespeare. So they are trying to deconstruct the bard. So deconstruction resists effort by the traditional critic to produce any unified text of a Shakespearean play, because that is how they look at a text. A traditional literary critic would like to look at the apparent unity behind the disunity of the text, whereas a deconstructionist critic always would try to look out for the apparent disunity behind the unity of, or the so-called unity of the text. And they challenge, to use the words of Terence Hawkes, the tyrannical boundaries created by traditional literary critical discourses while dealing with Shakespeare. So they are interested in questioning or in contesting these boundaries. Well, if you ask me, their contribution is not that significant when it comes to Shakespeare. So the only significant book on this area is Shakespeare and Deconstruction by Douglas Adkins and David Bourgeon, which was published in 1988. So this is the only book. I'm not saying that it's a well-argued, well thought out kind of book, but that way the deconstructionist contribution to Shakespeare criticism is not that significant. In fact, according to some critics, deconstructive reading suffers from willful obscurity. I repeat, according to them, it suffers from willful obscurity. So they deliberately make their reading of Shakespeare obscure. Well, now let's go to the post-colonial reflections on Shakespeare. Here again, you will find a paradigm shift. The narrative drastically and dramatically changes when it comes to post-colonial approach to Shakespeare. So it foregrounds histories of peoples and cultures outside the traditional Anglo-American scholarly world. So that way, according to me, it's a paradigm shift. So here, in the post-colonial discourse, Shakespeare becomes a fractured discursive field premised on the history of colonial domination by the white race. So these post-colonial critics, they look at Shakespeare from different perspectives. And while doing so, they foreground issues related to race and color. So what are they doing? They are challenging the canonical Shakespeare. Shakespeare, the brand. Shakespeare, the supreme icon of English literature. So their criticism is characterized by rejection of essentialism and idealism, something which was developed on a grand scale by A.C. Bradley. So they interrogate race and nationhood, and role of Shakespeare's drama as an instrument of colonial power. This is something they focus on repeatedly. So how Shakespeare was used an instrument during the colonial times to reinforce the colonial ideology. And Anya Lumba, she speaks on Shakespearean pedagogy in India, how Shakespeare became part of English literature pedagogy in India. Please go through her works on, Shakespeare. And they also question the myth of universal bard. This myth was created by Ben Jonson. Shakespeare belongs to all times. Shakespeare's works are timeless. They question this. They contest this notion of Shakespeare as a universal bard, or they question the whole argument that Shakespeare's works are the symbol of universal human experience. And they also have issues about the so-called erasure of Othello's blackness. Othello let's be very clear about it. Othello is a black warrior, and even some staging of Othello, it's the role is done by a white actor, whether it is the legendary Laurence Olivier or whoever it may be. So they have issues about this, this aspect of Shakespeare's play, and they look at Prospero as a colonizer. This is, all of us are familiar with this interpretation of Prospero, or this interpretation of Shakespeare's Tempest. Now, we Indians today, okay, we have to confront this dilemma, whether we like it or not, whether we, accept it or not. We can see privileging Shakespeare's text. It's happening everywhere. It's happening across all English lecture halls. Well, let's be very clear. Shakespeare is a genius, but is he the only one? That is the question. And we have Shakespeare Festival, everywhere we are celebrating, and that's the reason why we are meeting here today on this virtual platform. And tomorrow, I'll be delivering a talk in one of the colleges in Goa as part of Shakespeare Festival. Now, the question is, why do we privilege Shakespeare alone? What about our own past masters? Now, let me give you one example. Okay, we have in Kannada, we have a poet. His name is Kumaravyasa. Yes, come out with a wonderful rendition of Mahabharata epic in Kannada titled Bharata Katha Manjari. Remember, he was Shakespeare's contemporary. Okay, he lived in the 16th century, and I'm amazed by some of the similes used by this poet, and according to me, in no way, in terms of genius, in no way he is lesser to Shakespeare, so to speak. Forget about my friends from Maharashtra or rest of India, even students from Karnataka. They have heard of Shakespeare, but they haven't heard of Kumaravyasa, who was his contemporary in India, who was writing in Kannada. Now, let me be very clear to you. When I ask you to go back, okay, I get sometimes, I become uneasy. It's not, I'm not a revivalist. Okay, let me also tell you, Kannada is not my mother tongue. Okay, because only thing is, I studied in a Kannada medium school, and I had the privilege of reading Kumaravyasa during my school days. So the point is, we have to speak about some of our own greats who are part of our heritage, whether it is in Marathi or Kannada or Malayalam or Hindi, doesn't matter. But at the same time, we don't have to glorify them. No. Sometimes we tend to glorify the past. No. Past is not the locale of glory. But at the same time, we have to do justice to our own people. And that is possible if we also privilege some of our own people, or if we go back to our past, and then we'll be able to find some diamonds, so to speak. And that is, I believe, that is possible. And that's the only way we will do justice to Shakespeare, by comparing him, or by juxtaposing some of our own writers with him. And that would enable us to come out of the post-colonial dilemma. Now, let me conclude. Let me conclude by quoting Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold beautifully summarizes Shakespeare in his sonnet. Others abide our question, but thou art free. What a beautiful expression. You can question others. Okay, they adhere to our framework of questions. We can come to grips with others. We can measure other writers, but not you. Thou art free. You are as free as a wind. We cannot, frame you. We cannot approach you with a defined framework. You are beyond comparison, in the sense others abide our question. We are able to interrogate them, or we are able to look at them with a set of questions. And that is how we think that we have come to grips with them. But not you. You are free. And I think this is the ultimate compliment ever given to Shakespeare. So, the rich diversity of Shakespeare criticism is due to Shakespeare's intuitive ability to come to grips with and articulate the complex riddles, contradictions, and emotions of a human world in an idiom invented by the bard himself. He's incomparable. Okay, I can spend hours together while talking about Shakespeare's language, Shakespeare's idiom, but that is Shakespeare for you. So when you read Shakespeare, you know, it's like any work of Shakespeare. It's like a dazzling diamond. So you know, we are told a diamond dazzles and it reveals its different shades, and that's what happens when you read Shakespeare. And each time you read Shakespeare, you come out with a new meaning, a new shade of diamond. But at the same time, why Shakespeare is you know, why in Shakespeare's context this powerful metaphor of diamond is used? Because here I would like to use a phrase by D.H. Lawrence, which he used in some other context, but I would like to apply it to Shakespeare. Why Shakespeare is relevant even today? Why Shakespeare is our contemporary? To use a famous phrase of Ian Watt, it's because Shakespeare was able to see through the carbon beneath the diamond. Now, Lawrence said, diamond, yes, diamond is a diamond, but we all know that diamond is made of carbon. So as a writer, it is our job, you know, it is my job to see the carbon beneath the diamond. So what did he mean by it? The essential humanity that binds all of us together. Juliet may be a princess, but her vulnerability, you know, she reveals her true self through her vulnerability. And therefore, you know, you don't look at Juliet as a princess, the diamond, but you see her humanity, her vulnerability, the carbon beneath the diamond. It is also true of Macbeth. He may be Bellona's bridegroom, a great warrior, but when he confronts the riddles of life, when he confronts some insurmountable kind of situation, he comes out with an utterance. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. You know, this is the exclamation of a human being, not of a warrior, certainly not of Bellona's bridegroom. So that way, you know, he reveals his true and vulnerable human self, carbon beneath the diamond. And here, let me tell you, my dear friends, Shakespeare is a master. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such an interesting and multidimensional discourse. It feels as if we were in a time machine, traveling from Shakespeare's time to present times. Sir cleverly brought to fore the different theories applied on Shakespeare's works like Marxism, feminism, deconstruction, postcolonial, etc. It indeed was an enlightening journey, sir, which indeed proved that Shakespeare was not of an age, but of all times. Thank you so much, sir. Now, if somebody have some questions, they can unmute themselves and ask.
Hello, sir.
Anybody? Right.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the wonderful lecturer. My name is Harish, and I am also from Karnataka, who is presently working in Bijapur, sir, from Karnataka. Now, my question is, could you please throw some light on the critics from Karnataka? I mean, what is their response to the Shakespeare? Because we have multiple translations in Kannada of Shakespeare and adaptations. But I would like to know, sir, could you please throw a bit light on that?
No, Shakespeare is the darling of Kannada writers and Kannada critics. So
that's why I'm asking.
Everybody has translated or everybody has adopted Shakespeare in one way or the other. Shriram Karan did it way back in 1930s. Kuempu also did it, Raktakshi. So you have many writers and you have L.S. Sheshagiri Rao writing on Shakespeare. So we have a very rich tradition of Kannada writers and critics responding to Shakespeare. And you will find not only in Kannada, you will also find it in Bengali, in Marathi, in Hindi, everywhere. And that had its beginnings during the colonial period because they all studied Shakespeare. It's as simple as that. That whole generation studied Shakespeare. As I told you earlier, Shakespeare was introduced in colonies during the colonial times, and it had its own ideological purpose. Got it? So he was part of that. Therefore, I said Shakespeare entered India as part of colonial baggage. So while examining Shakespeare, we also have to historicize this entire aspect. It's not only about talking, not only about reading Macbeth or teaching Macbeth in the classroom. It's also about being historically aware of the journey of Shakespeare from England to India during the colonial times. Okay, so that is also very important for us to do as students of English literature.
I hope your question has been answered, sir. Someone else wants to put in a question?
Yes, ma'am. Sir, I had a question that if we ever were to compare Shakespeare's dramas with Mahabharata, what would be your ratings or your reaction?
One can do that. Mahabharata is a great epic, no doubt about it. There are narratives, there are sub-narratives. It's a huge text with series of subtexts. One could do that. Why not? You make a beginning. Okay? You make a beginning.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Anybody else? Okay. I think sir's lecture was clear enough. And it indeed was. So no questions as such. Okay. Now it has been a wonderful session. Time now to part ways till we meet again tomorrow with yet another Shakespeare's scholar. But before that, I would like to propose a vote of thanks. To start with, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Dr. K. Shripad Bhatt, who agreed to be the part of this short-term course and enlighten us with a scholarly presentation. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My sincere thanks to Dr. Pranoti Chakravarti, President, Shakespeare Society of Central India, for the encouragement and blessings she showers on us from time to time. Thank you, ma'am. We are grateful to the Secretary of Shakespeare Society of Central India, Dr. Usha Sakure, for all the hard work she has put in to rope in all the colleges, the speakers, and organize a national level course for the benefit of the students. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thanks is also due to the principals of all the organizing colleges, Dr. Urmila Dabi, Dr. Prashant Shelke, Dr. Priya Vansari, Dr. Vikas Dhomne, for providing unending support to conduct the certificate course. Thank you, all the sirs and ma'ams. Thanks to the coordinators, Dr. Veena Joseph, Dr. Nihal Sheikh, Dr. Madhvi Morel, and Dr. Kartik Panikkar for your inputs, which matter a lot. Thank you all. Thanks to the participants for the active participation. Thank you all. Last but not the least, thanks to the technicians and all those who were involved directly and indirectly to make this course a virtual reality. Thank you all. Now, before we end, let me remind you that we meet tomorrow again at 11 a.m. with yet another well-known Shakespearean genius, Dr. Murli Krishnan TR, who will deal with the topic revisiting the early comedies, a reappraisal of Merry Wives of Windsor. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.